rolled down the hill at Fortrose in a barrel of boiling tar.
The Brahan seer met his grisly fate here at Channery Point, as commanded by a vengeful Lady Isabella Seaforth. But as he braved the flames, GillEòin made a prophecy that would curse all future generations of the Seaforth Mackenzies. Or so the legend goes. History tells a different, more complex story. According to Alex Sutherland, there are, rather confusingly, two Brahan seers, a legendary figure and a real character, GillEòin, who was tried for witchcraft.
What we do know is that 9 people died here, both men and women, killed for witchcraft, executed for witchcraft.
Burned to death?
Burned to death in this site here somewhere.
And was GillEòin one of these?
Well, that's where the problem sets in, because GillEòin of legend and the GillEòin of history are not one and the same. The GillEòin of history predates the GillEòin of legend by about 100 years. GillEòin is historical, and the genesis of the Brahan seer legend is this historical GillEòin. The legend of the Brahan seer is an amalgam of oral tradition, historical fact, folklore, and literary romance.
So what's happened is that over the years, the story of GillEòin and the terrible events that happened here at Channery Point, where these people were burned to death for witchcraft, that entered into the folk culture.
That's correct.
And then a myth is built up around that, and
That's right.
that is the Brahan seer.
That's the Brahan seer. The Brahan seer is a legendary figure. He's not flesh and blood as we would know it.
Alex, why did the legendary character, the Brahan seer, become so important to Highland culture?
In any culture, and the Highland culture in particular, saw a lot of change over the centuries. And when there's change, people try to make sense of those changes. And they often use prophecy as a medium through which to do that. And the Brahan seer became a sort of messianic figure, because when he was put to death, according to the legend, he was a very pious, righteous man. So this sort of gives him some authority, some ability to reprimand, if you like, or censure his social superiors.
He's on the moral high ground, really.
Exactly, yes.
So this legendary Brahan seer became a mouthpiece of the people, and his prophecies gave rank-and-file clan members a way to indirectly criticise their chiefs in increasingly troubled times.
For many ordinary people in the Highlands, the legend of the Brahan seer became a kind of focus for the great changes that were beginning to sweep across Scotland. And these not only altered the fabric of Highland life, but totally transformed the traditional relationship between the chief and his clan.
And it's said the Brahan seer saw it all coming. In a vision of a menacing cloud, he saw the destruction of the Jacobite army and the deaths of thousands of clansmen at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. And it's further claimed he predicted the brutal Highland clearances of the 18th and 19th centuries, when chiefs and landlords forced the people off the land to make way for more profitable sheep. Whether prophesied or not, turbulent change certainly swept the Highlands in the centuries after the Brahan seer's death. I met up with writer and historian Jim Hunter at Buncrew Castle, another former Mackenzie home, to find out why clan society fell apart.
A lot of it starts with the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745. It panicked the British government, and they set out not just to crush the Jacobites militarily, which they did at the Battle of Culloden, of course, in 1746, but then and thereafter they set out totally to destroy the clan society that had made it possible for Bonnie Prince Charlie to raise his Highland army in the first place. And part of that was military repression, the burning of homes, the rounding up of cattle, all of that. But much more subtle and ultimately far more effective was the policy of integrating the clan chiefs, as it were, into the British establishment. And in the space of a generation or so, these individuals made this amazing transition, really, from Gaelic-speaking tribal chieftains to southern aristocrats speaking English now with an old Etonian accent. The one thing about clan chiefs that didn't change was that they had always felt themselves to be people of real status. But in this new society, the chief at the top of the pile, what he wants now is money. He has to have money. And somebody at the time actually encapsulated that very neatly. Somebody commenting on this at the end of the 18th century said, where the Highland chief once had to have hundreds of fighting men at his command, now he needs a full purse with lots of guineas.
The aspirations of these wannabe clan aristos, like the Mackenzie lords of Seaforth, totally transformed Highland society, creating a class divide between the chiefs and their people. This is vividly demonstrated by the new homes they built for themselves. Here they could really flaunt their wealth. As the chiefs began parading themselves in their finery through the streets of Edinburgh and here in Inverness, let's not forget who was footing the bill. Tens of thousands of ordinary clansmen and women who were still living and working off the land. So what was life like for them? Pretty grim by all accounts. The contrast between chief and clan is dramatically brought to life at Newton Moore's Highland Folk Museum, where Bob Powell gave me an insight into how ordinary Mackenzies would have lived. I was amazed at how primitive their homes were. Thatched roofs, turf walls, no windows, where people and animals sheltered together.
Well, it's dark, Bob, I'll say that for a start. I mean, where are the candles?
Well, many of these people didn't have candles. They couldn't afford them, because candles were created from tallow. Tallow came from the livestock, but they needed the livestock alive to be able to send them off to market to raise cash to pay their rent.
So, well, what kind of food, what kind of diet would they have had? You're only talking about 150 years ago here in the Highlands. What would people have eaten?
It is basic. The principal crops are going to be oats or sort of beer, which is another primitive form of barley. And if we think about the oats, we're talking about porridge or oat cakes, the likes of kale that they may have grown within the kale yard, maybe taking nettles, nettle soup, which would be rich in iron, or berries at the right time of year.
I mean, presumably they've got cows, cattle. I mean, that must have been an important part of their diet too.
Well, you would think so, but in reality that wasn't the case, because they needed those cattle alive to be able to sell them to get cash to pay their rent. But the actual management of them was not an easy thing either, because there was no haymaking as such.
There's no haymaking?
No haymaking as such, no. This didn't really come into the main part till the end of the 18th century.
So how did they keep the animals then over the winter?
Well, the lucky ones were brought into the byre. I mean, the vast majority would have been outside. But we do know that the ones that were in here, because of the sparsity of feed, that they'd be so weak come springtime, they had to be physically carried out to eat the new shoots that were growing around them to build the strength up again.
So life was bleak indeed, not just for Mackenzies, but for all lowly clansmen and women in the Highlands of the 18th century. A generation after the Battle of Culloden, all the old ties of duty and care seemed to have been broken. And the desperate struggle simply to exist was actually made worse by chiefs whose role it had once been to protect the clan. Here on the west coast, in the district of Assynt, where the old Mackenzie lands run into the sea, are great tracts of empty country. It's a true wilderness landscape, but 200 years ago there were thriving communities here. There's nothing much left of them today, except for an occasional sad heap of stones, all that remains of whole communities, sacrificed to fill the purses of their clan chiefs.
According to one landowner, Sir George Mackenzie of Cool, getting rid of the people was part of a great Highland improvement. To paraphrase him, Highlanders were a filthy, lazy race, and removing them from the land would be a great improvement to the entire country. Amazing! A Mackenzie who would once have been a clan chief saying this about his own people.
The heartlessness of landowners like George Mackenzie of Cool has come to characterise the story of the Highland clearances. But the reality is perhaps more complicated. While it's true that many clan members were evicted, others actually chose to leave their ancestral lands.
Back in the 1780s, a